All right, well, good evening. Welcome. My name is Nicole Zervos. I am an Associate Director of Admissions here at Clark. I work with some of our first year students who are coming from states such as Connecticut, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New Hampshire. I also work with our transfer student population in the office, and I've been at Clark for about a year and a half now. So tonight I am joined by three panelists who are going to introduce themselves in a moment. But tonight we're here to talk to you about research at Clark. So Clark is a great school if you are interested in pursuing research. Clark is one of the smallest research universities in the country, but we're kind of an interesting mix of both a research university and a small liberal arts college, with about 2/3 of our undergraduate students completing research during their time at Clark. So great opportunities for our students at the undergraduate level to really dive into their research and get that hands-on opportunity. So tonight we've got Michael Boyer, a associate professor in the Department of Physics, Morgan Hilton, and Inange Kalusian, who are both seniors and doing research at Clark. And they're going to kind of provide some of their experiences for you about opportunities for undergraduates to get involved in research. But before we get started, I kind of want to go over a little bit about how the format of the webinar and how this is going to work. So you'll notice that in Zoom, there are two kind of features. There is a Q&A feature and a chat feature. So any questions that you have for any of the panelists throughout the webinar, feel free to use the Q&A feature. We'll be checking there for your questions. We will leave some time at the end of the presentation to answer any questions live and be able to kind of answer any questions that you have. So put your questions in the Q&A. You may not see your question right away as soon as you type it, but we will try to get to as many questions as we can. If you have any technology issues tonight, if for some reason you can't see or hear us, please use the chat feature. We'll be checking the chat feature regularly and trying to troubleshoot any technological issues that may come up. So now I'm going to have the panelists introduce themselves so they can give you a little bit of background on who they are, what their role is at Clark, and you can think of any questions that you may want to ask them. So I'm going to start with Professor Michael Boyer. Would you tell us a little bit about your role at Clark, what kind of classes you teach, and a brief introduction to what some of your research involves?
Sure. Thanks, Nicole, and certainly welcome everyone. So I'm Mike Boyer. I'm the chair of the physics department. I joined Clark back in 2011, so this is my 10th year. In terms of teaching, I teach across the physics curriculum. Currently, I'm teaching our advanced undergraduate course on electricity and magnetism. It's one of my favorite courses to teach, but I also enjoy teaching quantum physics and relativity. In terms of my research interests, my main area of research is solid state physics. So I study the physics of metals, semiconductors, superconductors. In particular, I'm an experimentalist, and in my laboratory, we use a technique, scanning tunneling microscopy, to study atomic scale physics in low dimensional materials. And specifically, the microscope in our laboratory has the ability to directly image individual atoms in a material and probe their electronic properties. So that's a little bit about me and some of the stuff I do at Clark.
Great, thank you. Morgan, I'll have you go next.
Hi, everyone. Congratulations to those of you who have been accepted, which I think is all of you. So big congrats. My name is Morgan. I'm a senior here at Clark, like Nicole said. I'm originally from Baltimore, Maryland, but I'll be heading to New York City for law school next year, which is very exciting. And then here at Clark, academically, I study English with a minor in community youth education studies, a concentration in comparative race studies, and then also, of course, I'm on the pre-law track. And then outside of my academics, I'm one of the chapter leaders for InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, one of the executive editors of the Undergraduate Research Journal, and then I'm also currently doing two independent research projects, one in the English department, which is my honors thesis, and the other through the sociology department, which has been funded by the Steinbrecher Fellowship here at Clark. So you'll hear quite a bit about that a little bit later.
Great, thank you. And Inange.
Hi everyone, my name is Inonge. I use she, her pronouns. I'm originally from Prince George's County, Maryland, and I'll actually be heading to Baltimore, Maryland in the fall for my master's. I am a admissions ambassador here, and outside of that, oh, I forgot to say, I study psychology with a minor in biology on the pre-health track. And then outside of school, I am the captain of the women's soccer team, the co-founder and co-president of the Clark Athletics Inclusion Coalition, and I'm also on the executive boards of the Black Student Union and Caribbean African Student Association. And like Morgan, I'm also completing two independent research projects right now. The first one being my honors thesis in the psychology department. And then I'm also doing an independent study in the chemistry department, researching protein expression in various cancers.
Great, thank you all so much. Let's see. Ooh. One too far. So I'm going to start off by having Professor Boyer speak and just have him explain a little bit about how students can get involved in research and share a little bit about his own research and then some of the students who have worked in his research lab. So Professor Boyer, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Excellent. So I think even from hearing from the other panelists, you can hear that the research opportunities at Clark are broad. And that's even true within a single department. So for example, in the physics department, we have active research, which runs the gamut from fundamental physics in understanding quantum materials to studying infectious disease transmission and COVID in particular, and in studying biological and ecological systems. So in terms of getting involved with research, I think this is broadly true that it really starts with a conversation, that a student reaches out to a specific faculty member that with whom they might want to work. My experience, so some of these students may be students that have taken a course with me, but some of these students who approach me are students I've never had but had heard about my research. So we typically set up a time to meet. I give a broad overview about my research. And I also encourage students to speak with other faculty members because there are many different research areas and different approaches. So in physics, we have theoretical approaches, computational approaches, experimental approaches. So speaking with faculty is not only a good way to understand what faculty are doing, but also for students to figure out where their interests may lie as well. With my own group, if a student is interested in possibly getting involved with research, I will often invite them to attend our weekly research group meetings. It's a low pressure way for them to hear a little bit about what we do, engage some of their interest in our research. And then if they're interested in going further, then we can talk about specific projects that they might want to work on. Getting involved with research, that can occur during the year, that can occur during the summer as well. So during the year, there are opportunities through directed studies. So that is a independent study course where a student earns credit while conducting research. But I've also had students who weren't sure about how much time they could commit to doing research at that time, but were interested in getting involved. And so they volunteered, and some weeks they were able to push a project forward, and other weeks they had to step back to take care of other obligations. During the summer, some departments, the physics department definitely, and generally in the sciences, host an 8 to 10 week summer research program for undergraduates. So this is a nice opportunity for students to focus purely on research, not have to worry about balancing classes, extracurriculars, and conducting research that you have to do during the school year. We're able to support our students carrying out summer research. So this occurs in a variety of different ways. So through university funds, through department funds, or funding from individual faculty grants. And in the physics department, we're able to support roughly about 15 students per summer to conduct research. And this includes this past summer where, as everyone knows, all sorts of things had to pivot, and we went and had our summer research program virtually. And so I guess one of the things I want to emphasize, and I can talk a little bit about it later about what drew me to Clark, is that it's really, I think it's unique in the way that undergraduates can get involved with research, and they can get involved with research very early on in their studies. You don't have to wait to your senior year. Go to the next slide, Nicole. In terms of a little bit about my own research, so I'm an experimentalist. I study the physics contained in conductors and semiconductors and superconductors. So a conductor, that's just a material where charges, or specifically electrons, move freely, so electrical current can easily flow. Semiconductors, charges don't easily flow. They have something called a band gap, but they're really useful for applications in, for example, light-emitting diodes. But there's a lot of fundamental physics that we don't understand about these materials, and so we can use something called a scanning tunneling microscope. That's what you see in the middle, and that gold cylinder. We can use that microscope to actually image the atomic structure of materials. So that microscope's in the vacuum chamber that you see on right. That vacuum chamber allows us to go from very low temperatures, so to 9 Kelvin, very, very cold, up to basically the boiling point of water, or a little bit higher. So we have a large temperature range, which allows us to study physics and how it evolves with temperature in these materials. And personally, I'll say that I always get excited that whenever we can see atoms. So that I really like to be able to see this atomic structure of these materials. In terms of things that students do, for example, when they're involved with research in my group, so there's experimental work. So there's directly working with our scanning tunneling microscope, acquiring data. Students may develop instrumentation or make other types of measurements, like resistance measurements. And then there's the data acquisition, there's the analysis as well. So image processing, looking at spectroscopy and analyzing that. As you may be able to see in some of these images, there are all sorts of periodic signals. Some of them may be from atoms, some of them may be from other things. And so we're interested in what are these periodic signals and what are their origin. And then we do computational modeling as well. So we try to use simple models to simulate our data. The data can be very complex, and so we try and distill some of the major features through our models, and this gives us insight into the physics that's going on in these materials. And Nicole, if we can go to the next slide. Excellent, thank you. So just to give you a little bit of a feeling for what students have gone on to do in physics, and students who've worked with me, a lot of these students go on to physics graduate programs. And we've had students go to Berkeley and Cornell and University of British Columbia in recent years. But doing a physics major, for example, doesn't mean you have to go into physics, and students have broad interests. And we've had students go on to graduate programs in material science, in master's programs and PhD programs in engineering. Students go into finance and computer science. Other students are really interested in getting involved in teaching, and we have a nice education program and a master's in education program at Clark. And others are ready just to join immediately the workforce. And we've had students recently go into join renewable energy startup companies, or others who went into, for example, designing superconducting magnets at Medvian. So that's a little bit about what students in my group have done, as well as what they've done post-Clark.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. I have a couple of questions just to follow up. So one is, what are some of the types of responsibilities that undergrads have in your research lab? What kind of projects or things can they take on?
So that's a really good question, and it depends on a few things. It depends on the student's background, in terms of where are they a first year student, are they a senior student, and how long they might have worked with us, and some of their interests. So some students who've worked with me are very interested in programming-based projects. Others really like to tinker and construct things, and so that may determine a little bit of whether you're more on data acquisition or you're doing some more developing algorithms for analysis. And then I would say that a student who works with a group over a certain amount of time can really evolve a project, and they can be involved in multiple aspects, from data acquisition to analysis to modeling, and they can work on multiple materials. And I'd say that one of the nice culminations is it's not unusual at all for an undergraduate to be a co-author on a peer-reviewed manuscript. And I think that that's a great service to the students and what they want to do later on. But also, I think we care about the research that the students are doing. They contribute in meaningful ways to questions that we are interested in and want to answer. So I hope that gives a little bit of an idea for that.
Thank you. And lastly, why would you say Clark is a good fit for students who are interested in doing research?
That's a really good question. So I'll answer it in the way that, in terms of what drew me to Clark as a faculty member. So in terms of Clark, as you were mentioning, is a little bit unique in terms of its position as a liberal arts research institution. So my experience has been at large research universities. The emphasis has been on faculty research, sometimes at the expense of undergraduate education. That's been my personal experience. And what I've also experienced is that there's typically in those environments limited opportunity for undergraduates to get involved. I've also been in the purely liberal arts college setting. And my experience was that the pendulum swung a little bit in the other way, that their emphasis was very strongly on undergraduate teaching, but there were typically fewer high-powered research opportunities for students. And so Clark, and what drew me to Clark and what I have personally felt is that research and teaching have been equally valued. And I think this has a tremendous impact on opportunities in undergraduate research. So undergraduate students have an opportunity to work in, for example, world-class laboratories. They work side by side with graduate students and postdocs. And getting back to what I mentioned a moment ago is that as faculty, we don't give a research problem and a project purely as a learning experience for the student. These projects have application to real-world problems that we're interested in. And again, it's common for undergraduates to be co-authors on peer-reviewed papers. So I would say that almost every paper that I've published has involved an undergraduate as a co-author. And these are the types of experiences which are advantageous. For example, when you're applying to graduate school, it's unusual for most undergraduates to have a peer-reviewed publication. And here, there's someone from Clark who is applying for a graduate program. You stand out if you have that experience. And the same type of experience when you're joining the workforce, when you have these types of experiences that you can draw on in an interview and say, this is the skills I have and this is how I can apply them.
That's great. Thank you. So now I'm going to turn it over to Morgan. Oh, sorry. What one? My PowerPoint is getting a little ahead of me tonight. I'm going to turn it over to Morgan. So Morgan, can you kind of take us down memory lane and tell us, how did you kind of initially get involved in research?
Yeah, for sure. So you all that are here are currently already a million steps ahead of where I was when I came into college. I was very much like, I had this perception of research that it was like you were in a cold, sad, gray laboratory working with no one and just doing science things. And as someone who had no interest in that, I was like, stop talking about research. I don't want to do this. Obviously, when I came to Clark, that drastically changed. I think a big thing for me was like taking different classes that centered around research and realizing all that research could be and really what that meant. So I think most of my research projects were very much like born organically out of my like experiences in the classroom, feeling like, oh, I really enjoyed like this course paper I wrote, but like I had bigger questions, or like I didn't like this like other academic article I read. I didn't think it really got it right. I want to contribute to that. So that's how both of my projects were born, really. In the English department, I took a class. I started taking classes in African American literature very early on. I was very bored with like white British literature that I had been reading all of my life, especially in high school. So I really just wanted something different, and I like fell in love with it. So I've kind of been studying that since my sophomore year. And my honors thesis was really born out of reading The Color Purple in like an intro to African American literature class. So my thesis looks at letters and epistolary novels, which are novels written in letters that are authored by Black women throughout American history. So I'm examining the letter as kind of a space for more subversive, uncensored access to print than other kind of forms of publication allowed, and how that provided Black women a space for more subversive identity construction, political messaging, and just greater amounts of like literary agency. So that's kind of my English thesis. And then my other project in the sociology department was very, very similar. I took a class with Professor Jack Delahanty very intentionally because I knew that he researched progressive religious activism, which is something I'm very interested in. I did a term paper for his course and decided I wanted to take it further, and ended up studying basically looking at the intersection of race and politics within Christian prison ministry nonprofits, which are like a very specific set of nonprofits that work within the criminal justice sphere. So I wanted to interview people who worked within that sphere and understand, kind of go all English major on like their language of how they like talked about their work, and understood how they understood their own racial identity and politics intersecting with their work. So it's kind of a nutshell of both of my projects. So very much both of them were like building off of things that I learned within the classroom.
Great. And I know that you're also involved with Clark's Scholarly Journal. So can you talk a little bit about that, how you got involved with that, and kind of what are some other opportunities for Clark students to kind of present their research in the kind of different areas?
Yeah, SURGE was definitely, or the Scholarly Undergraduate Research Journal. If I say SURGE, that's what I'm talking about. That's the acronym. SURGE was really big in kind of expanding, again, my understanding of what research could be and what research really talked about and what it really was. Because SURGE is an interdisciplinary journal, but very much leans towards the social sciences and humanities and the submissions we get and what we publish. So I got involved my first year with the copy editing team because I was considering a career in like magazine publishing, which I decided I didn't want to do, but I did really like the research journal, and I was promoted to copy editor, like the head of copy editing and grammar things during my junior year. So really, we accept research from both like full-length academic articles or manuscripts, as well as shorter communication pieces, which are kind of like translations of like a research poster into a much shorter, briefer form. From all undergraduates at Clark of any level. You don't need, I think you need a faculty sponsor, but you don't need to be a part of like a prestigious research group or anything like that. So we get a lot of students capstone papers or course papers that they're really proud of, as well as independent research they're doing outside of the classroom. We publish about 5 articles a year, but everyone who submits gets a full sheet of like peer review comments as well as faculty comments, which I think is really, really helpful just in like, even if you don't get published, growing your research abilities, your writing abilities, all of that stuff. And it's just really good practice. We follow like the double blind standard, which is pretty common for most peer reviewed journals. So it's really good practice to kind of get the feel of what it's like to go through the submission and publication process for a research journal.
Awesome, thank you. Now I'm going to turn it over to Inange. Could you tell us, kind of similar to Morgan, kind of how did you get involved in research at Clark, and kind of give us a brief overview of what your research looks like?
Sure. So my research, or I guess like the timeline of my research is a little bit unconventional just because I do plan on going to medical school, but I majored in psychology. And I also just want to put out there that if you are planning on going to medical school, you can major in anything that you'd like as long as you still take the required courses for medical schools. And so I think Professor Boyer mentioned that, you know, when applying to graduate schools, medical schools, things like that, it is looked upon favorably to have some sort of research experience, publications, things like that on your resume, right? And early on, I knew I wanted to go to medical school. I didn't really know what that meant, like what my resume should look like, things like that. And someone told me that I should consider getting involved in research at Clark. And again, didn't really know how to go about that. But in the beginning of my sophomore year, I reached out to one of my intro biology TAs who was a PhD student in the biology department. And I really liked her, and I just said, hey, what is your research on? Like, how do I get involved in research here? And she had me meet with the PI, which is the principal investigator of the lab that she was working in. And she, they kind of just walked me through, like, this is how undergraduates participate in research in our lab. If this is something that you'd be interested in, the opportunity is there for you. And, they kind of just, that was my first exposure to what bench work looked like in a biology setting. I was able to sit in on lab meetings. I learned organizational skills in the lab and more basic things like culturing and things like that. And then later on, I also will mention that so this was on a volunteer basis also. So my first semester in this lab was volunteer basis. And then by the second semester, I was being paid for my research in the lab, which is really nice. And that was through like a grant opportunity. And then in terms of my research in the psychology department, I did a Capstone seminar one semester, and that was more like writing a research paper, I suppose. But instead of doing a paper, I actually did a podcast, and that was really cool. And what I did was I investigated infant and maternal mortality rates between races. So looking at like the rates for Black women versus white women. And that kind of came from like just like the intersection of psychology and biology. And that kind of like intersects at public health. And that's how I got involved with that. And then my professor from my capstone seminar, who's also my academic advisor, Dr. Overstreet, she's amazing. She recommended that I consider doing an honors thesis in the psychology department. So I applied and I got approved. And my project right now is kind of like a continuation of looking at racial stigma in healthcare. So my project looks at the microcosm of healthcare in higher education. So specifically predominantly white institutions and historically Black colleges and universities, and kind of like the interactions that Black college undergraduate students are having with the healthcare services, both the physical services as well as the mental health care services, and kind of just like comparing and seeing if there's any differences. I'm currently finishing that up and I'll be defending that next month, hopefully. And then I also do research in the chemistry department. Like I said, see, it just goes to show that you can really do anything that you put your mind to. And I mean that. But so my research in the chemistry department is an independent study. Professor Boyer also talked about those types of opportunities. And this was actually an opportunity that came to me through my biochemistry professor reaching out to me. And she just asked me if I would like to, do research in her lab. And I thought that what she was doing was really interesting. And that's what I'm doing this semester. And I work about 15 hours in the lab per week. And like I said, that's on researching protein expression in various cancers.
Thank you. So I have a question for you, sort of about research, but kind of a little bit about your overall experience at Clark. So you are an athlete. You do research, you've studied abroad, you're involved in, a number of clubs and organizations on campus. Can you just talk a little bit about like how you manage that all? Because I know that and you're on the pre-med track. I know a lot of students kind of come into Clark thinking that if they want to be pre-med, they can't be an athlete, or if they want to be pre-med, they can't study abroad, or they won't be able to do research. Or like, how have you kind of managed to do all of these things and kind of manage your time?
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of moving pieces. What was helpful for me was that my first year here at Clark, I kind of knew right off the bat that I wanted to pursue the pre-med track, except for a short little stint. Second semester, my first year, I was like, forget this, I'm going to be pre-law. But, I stuck it out. But so the first semester of my first year, I reached out to the pre-health advising office, and someone from that office was able to sit down with me and kind of go through my schedule with me, what classes are required of you for if you want to go to medical school, what sequence should you take things in. And I had also expressed that I want to study abroad and I wanted to do this, that, and the third. And, they kind of helped me just create a game plan for my 4 years here that I would say I think I stuck to it pretty well for the most part. And then just in terms of sports, I will say that I think we have a culture here in athletics where we take academics pretty seriously. I believe that in the athletics department, we have a higher overall GPA than we do the campus as a whole. I'll also say that the women's soccer team GPA is a 3.8. Thank you. And so there's definitely a lot of support there. And just in terms of playing sports, there's a lot of time management involved. But that was something that I knew I wanted to do in college. I was like, I know that if I don't play a sport, I'm just gonna have all this free time. And then the more free time I have, it's more time to not do my work. So the way that I look at it is I have practice at this time, I have a game at this time. So I know I need to do my work here. I know I need to go into the lab here so I can check on my experiment, things like that.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
One more. So if you'd like to learn a little bit more about getting started with research, we've got some pictures and a link here that you can go to. I think sort of the theme of what I'm hearing from Professor Boyer and Morgan and Inonge is a lot of it is kind of just reaching out to faculty, kind of taking that first step, kind of showing interest, setting up some meetings, setting up some opportunities to maybe do some volunteer work or to shadow. I think that's really a great place for students to start with kind of how to get started with research and get involved on campus with that. So now we're going to take some time for questions. I know there have been a few in the Q&A so far that have been answered, but we're happy to take any more questions that you may have. So I'll happy to read those live and have our panelists answer them. But feel free to put those in the Q&A. If you can't think of any questions right now, or if you have questions for us later on that you forgot to answer tonight, forgot to ask tonight, you can always email us at admissions@clarku.edu. Or if you have financial aid questions, you can always email financial aid as well. But we're happy to connect you to any of our current students, to connect you to faculty member or staff members on campus. So feel free to email us later on if you don't have any questions tonight. So one question I do want to answer or ask is, somebody has asked, I'm interested in obtaining a small liberal arts education and research opportunities that will prepare me for graduate school research. How involved are professors in teaching undergraduate students in the classroom? Do professors regularly teach undergraduate classes, and do professors grade and provide feedback on undergraduate work? So maybe start with Professor Boyer on this one.
I think that probably the other panelists are in more position to give some true feedback about this. So yes, we do teach our undergraduate courses. The expectation for any faculty members that they are teaching 4 undergraduate courses a year. So there really is a teaching focus from our perspective. We do grade. My students recently took an exam and submitted a problem set, so I have lots of fun ahead later tonight. But one of the things that I really did come to Clark for was the opportunity to work with students, both graduate students and undergraduate students. One of the things that I missed out when I was at a much larger research institution for my undergraduate work, I never knew my faculty, my instructors. They didn't know who I was for the most part, and so I think there's a lot of nice connection between faculty and students. But I think the students should really talk to this point.
Yeah, I can take this one. So from what I've experienced here at Clark, I've always had professors teaching my courses. I think things might be a little bit different at larger institutions. I think sometimes they have like graduate students teaching courses. That's not really the case here. But I will say most of the lab and discussion-based elements of a course are taught by PhD students. And that obviously is just to get them like more involved in the classroom setting because they'll likely be teaching later in the future. But it's also nice because, you know, a professor sometimes doesn't have enough time to be able to really sit down with you and go through like all of the lab elements of things. You know what I'm saying? Even though we are a small school and there is a lot of one-on-one time spent with professors, I would say most of that happens either in the classroom or in office hours, and then lab and discussions are used for interactions with the TAs who can give you more of like an individualized support.
Yeah, going off that, I can also just say that like I've had very few classes that even like had a TA included in them, but the ones that I did have, I actually really liked having a teaching assistant as well. Like for instance, my capstone class, I got like everything I submitted, I got feedback, like 2 sets of feedback, which was really great. And also like I just want to say that professors are also like very committed to helping you like outside the classroom in my experience. Like one of my the second reader for my thesis is actually on sabbatical right now, but she's still been like really, really responsive with like helping me out. So definitely like the vast majority of my like educational experiences have come through professors, although like I think teaching assistants are still like a really helpful like tool in a lot of classes.
Great, thank you. We have a question about research opportunities in the computer science department. I don't know if anyone has any friends who are computer science majors, or Professor Boyer, you might be able to speak a little bit to that as well.
Sure. No, I'd be happy to say a few things about that. So absolutely, there are research opportunities in computer science. There's so much growth in that field, and artificial intelligence and machine learning is really blossoming, and it's extending into so many different fields. So, for example, from a physics point of view, a lot of our research is actually going into more and more dealing with machine learning techniques. And so we have active collaborations between physics faculty, CS faculty, and students who have actually undergraduate students who have 2 research advisors, one in computer science, one in physics, to work on these joint projects. I also saw a question about Becker, which is certainly it's a really new. This is a really exciting opportunity, I think, where we're having a school come over from Becker, which is really going to hit on all sorts of areas at Clark, from computer science to English to visual and performing arts to physics. And so absolutely presume that there will be additional opportunities. But this is so new. Exactly what they will be and when they will be still needs to be really worked out. So I would say for that aspect, stay tuned.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Is that the program is so new that there are a lot of these details still being worked out, but definitely lots of opportunities for research in the computer science department. And I'm sure that as they work out those details, there'll definitely be more information about how that's going to work. There were a couple other questions that I know Morgan and Inonge answered over text, but I might just read a couple of them out loud since it doesn't seem like there are any more questions that are coming in, just to get you guys to maybe answer those and see if there's any other perspective you might want to provide on those. So one of the questions, which I think is important, was, are students able to do a double major in a STEM field and some other major, for example, studio art, and complete their degree in all 4 years? Or is it advisable that students primarily focus in one area? I think this is such a great question. Clark being both a research institution and a liberal arts institution, being a liberal arts school, we are absolutely encouraging students to take classes across the curriculum and really combine their interests together. So maybe we can kind of talk about how Clark does that in terms of being able to do research in a STEM field, but also maybe have a double major or a minor in another area.
I can speak a little bit about this one. So I obviously have had, I'm not coming from the perspective of a STEM and studio art major. That being said, I've taken courses or like done research in a lot of different departments at this point. I think there are a lot of like very interdisciplinary aspects to Clark's education. Like even a couple of my like English requirements have come from courses outside of the English department, for instance. I think it's also important to note the program of liberal studies, which really allows you to take classes in a lot of different disciplines and not have them quote unquote go to waste. So definitely that's a really great opportunity that has you take classes in 9 different disciplines basically to fulfill your graduation requirements. So I would say that like it definitely takes a little bit more planning if you want to double major. I sat down with kind of like what Anonge was saying, like sat down with my 4-year plan like very early on in college, and it was very helpful. But it's still very much an option. I have friends, one of my friends is a history major on the pre-med track who's been doing research in a biochemistry lab for the past couple semesters. That was something like very, very unexpected in his track that he was still able to kind of fit in with his history honors thesis. So it is definitely possible to do both. And I think it's pretty common that most students have some kind of double major or a major and a minor or something like that.
I'll also add that some majors require you to have at least a minor, if not a double major. So for example, the psychology major requires a minor because it has less requirements than some of the other majors. So for example, the psych major is 10 courses, whereas the bio major is 16 courses, I believe. And then in addition to that, you can also, you can like double minor in something if that's what you'd like to do. You can also minor in something and do a concentration as well if there's like a specific field that you'd like to study. So you can really mix and match whatever you want to study as long as you're also completing your PLS requirements that Morgan just mentioned.
I'm always impressed by how many students, when they tell me their major or to kind of give their introductions, it's always, I'm a major in this and a minor in that and a concentration in this. I think Clark students are definitely students who have a lot of different interests and they're not afraid to kind of pursue those and really see how they can draw those connections between them.
And just to add one thing to that, for example, there have been some recent physics majors who have had an interest in philosophy, and they've done double majors in physics and philosophy. Actually, two students just finished this up 2 years ago. And so there's absolutely no overlap in terms of the requirements for those majors other than the PLS, the prospective requirements. So absolutely, it's possible to do. But as Morgan was mentioning, you need to think and plan for that. So speaking to advisors in each department is paramount.
There's a question about trying to complete a triple major at Clark. I don't know if that's possible or if anybody has done that.
It is possible.
Okay.
But there, I think you particularly want some overlap. So one of my advisees did that, and personally, I would not have been able to handle it. He took 6 classes a semester, slept very little, but there was a lot of overlap. So it was physics, math, and computer science. Mm-hmm. And so it is possible. You need lots of overlap. And I think lots of advice along the way to see if that's something that is worthwhile doing, because you can be spread pretty thin. So be able to take courses, and part of the nice thing about being in a liberal arts environment is that you can take a variety of courses to satisfy interests. And so you can take courses without necessarily having to do a major or a minor.
Just to add on to that, I think another factor that played into my personal decision not to double major, I did not consider the triple major, but the double major was that you're required to complete a senior capstone project within all of your majors. Sometimes those overlap really nicely. In my case, it did not. And I decided that I really wanted to devote that time to doing an honors thesis in just one major rather than try to complete the 2 capstone situations. So that is another factor that made, for me, doing the like major with a minor in concentration more appealing because I was able to still take those classes and like have that on my resume and like get that really like in-depth experience, but not have to complete 95,000 capstone projects.
Yeah, I forgot about the capstone requirement for each major. So yeah, triple major would be a lot of a lot of work for that capstone. So we have a question about the difference between an honors thesis and a senior capstone. So maybe the students could kind of explain what the difference is between doing an honors thesis and the capstone project.
Yeah, I can take that one. So, at least for the psychology department, and I believe most departments, you are required to complete some sort of like capstone or research experience. So, in the psych department, it's 1 semester of a capstone and 1 semester of research. So, like I said, I did my capstone seminar, which is like a class instead of like a research class. So, I did my seminar, and that was the podcast that I was speaking about earlier. And then I completed one research semester in my advisor's lab. And so I fulfilled my requirements for the psychology major like a long time ago. I think I finished my sophomore year for some reason. And then so the honors thesis is something that you opt into, and it's something that you have to apply to. And so it's like an additional research component. I believe for the psychology department, you have to have a 3.5 cumulative GPA to apply. And then you basically apply to the honors program, and you have to have like a proposal of a research idea or topic that you would like to research. And then they review your application, and then that's a year-long course during your senior year. So it's completely separate from your actual requirements to complete the major.
Yeah, the English is very similar. I took in general, I think for most disciplines, like your capstone is usually just like 1 semester. You take some kind of like high level seminar class. In the English department, you end up writing a 30-page independent research paper, whereas the honors thesis usually takes like a year. And for reference, my honors thesis draft that I turned in yesterday was 88 pages. That gives you a little bit of a sense of the different level of like work that's going in.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. 88 pages. Good for you, Morgan. Great. So it looks like there aren't any more questions kind of specific to research right now, but I guess I'll end on kind of one. Actually, there's one question in the chat that asks, when do you need to know what majors or minors you're taking? So officially, you do need to declare your major by the end of your sophomore year, but maybe I'll let the students talk about kind of when they declared their majors and how they went about that process.
Yeah, I can take that one. So, like Nicole said, you have to declare your major by the end of your sophomore year. And then if you are going to be minoring in something, you have to declare that by the end of your junior year. And basically what this involves is just filling out a form just to let the offices know that this is what you're officially majoring and minoring in, as well as reaching out to advisors who will be like on the record as your official advisor. So you'll go through them to get approved for registering for classes and things like that, as well as, you should go to them for general advice. And you do have to have a minor advisor, I believe. At least that's what I was told.
Great, thank you.
I was going to say that there's a little flexibility in that. So absolutely, you need to declare a major by your second semester sophomore year. That can change. I've had students change their majors in their junior year, and I've had a student add a major their senior year. So there's a little time to figure things out. There's still time, even after you think you figured things out, to adjust a little bit. But that's where working with advisors are really, really helpful.
Mm-hmm. And I will say that if you are undecided or if you don't know exactly what you want your major to be coming into Clark, that is absolutely fine. Many students are undecided. Many students think they know what they want to study, and then they get to Clark and they change their minds, or they take a class with a professor they really love, and they end up going in a different direction than they originally thought. So I think the fact that you will have a faculty advisor from your first year at Clark from your FYI course, which is the first year intensive, I think is really helpful for students to kind of have that faculty advisor. There's also the Office of Academic Advising that provides a little bit more general advising if you just have questions about, what kind of classes to take, or figuring out your schedule, or kind of making that timeline like Morgan and Inange talked about. So there's definitely lots of support for students who are unsure of their major or if they want to change their major. And I think because we are a small school and you get to know your faculty well, you'll definitely have a lot of support. All right, so lastly, I'm going to end with one last question. I'll have everybody answer this. Could you tell us, what is your favorite thing about Clark? What do you love most about Clark?
I can start with that. So for background, I went to a very, very, very competitive public high school. And coming into college, I had a very demoralizing college search process, and it was all very exhausting. And I really didn't know that you could have an intellectually enriching and challenging experience and not be in competition and not hate everyone who was around you. So I think the thing that I love the most about Clark is I do feel like my peers really push me to be better and take advantage of opportunities and really pursue my passions, but in a very kind-hearted and supportive and collaborative way, which is something that I just was not anticipating from my college experience when I was in your shoes looking at colleges.
I'm happy to chime in there in terms of, for me, what is very different from my college experience is getting to know all my students. And so I enjoy the equal blend of teaching and research at Clark, but I really enjoy working closely with undergraduate students and graduate students in research and in the classroom.
My favorite thing about Clark has to be the sense of community I found. So, and I think that ties in with I guess my second favorite thing about Clark, which is that it just allows you to pretty much do anything you want. So like I said, I do research, I am in a bunch of clubs and organizations. I started my own club. I studied abroad. I'm a varsity athlete. What more could you ask for, honestly? And it's throughout all of these experiences, I've met such great people that I wouldn't have necessarily met if I don't know, went to another school or stayed home or anything like that. So definitely the sense of community that I found.
Thank you. Well, thank you all. Thanks to all our panelists for being here tonight and for answering questions about research. I know Morgan and Ninamge have put their emails in the chat, so feel free to reach out to them if you have any additional questions. You can always reach out to us at admissions@clarku.edu. And again, we're happy to answer any more questions or put you in touch with anyone else to kind of follow up on anything that you learned about tonight. So again, congratulations to everyone who's been admitted. We're hopefully looking forward to seeing you at Clark soon. I hope everyone has a good night, stays healthy and stays safe, and we'll see you again soon.